The luxury hotel lobby was buzzing with quiet elegance. Soft instrumental music playing in the background, the faint clinking of glasses from the nearby bar, and the occasional laugh of a well-dressed guest. I had just stepped inside, thinking I was meeting Emily for a quick getaway she had excitedly planned for us. But as I walked toward the reception desk, a voice stopped me cold. It was Emily. Her laugh, light and carefree, reached me before her words did. "Honestly, he's so clueless," she said, her tone filled with mockery. "Nathan thinks he's this big-shot entrepreneur. Bless his heart, he really tries to fit in, but he just doesn't get it." The words hit like a punch to the gut, but it didn't stop there. "I mean, can you believe he actually thought he was part of this family?" Her mother, Margaret, chimed in, her voice dripping with disdain. "He's good for one thing, his wallet." "Oh, and it's a big wallet." Emily's brother-in-law, Peter, added, laughing loudly. "The best part is he has no idea we've been planning this trip for months. Using his money, of course." My legs felt rooted to the marble floor as their laughter echoed in my ears. Every word was like a dagger, twisting deeper with each cruel jab. I took a step closer, hiding behind a decorative pillar, not wanting to believe what I was hearing. "He even suggested I book coach," Emily said, feigning horror. "As if we'd lower ourselves to that. First class, obviously. And the suite? Oh, wait until you see it, Mom. He has no idea we upgraded." I clenched my fists, my breathing heavy. This was the woman I married? The family I had supported, sacrificed for, and welcomed into my life without hesitation. My mind raced, replaying every kind gesture, every moment I tried to prove myself worthy of their approval. And for what? To be laughed at? Used? Unable to take another word, I stepped out from behind the pillar and walked toward the reception desk. My footsteps were steady, but inside, a storm was brewing. Emily's back was to me, her voice still carrying as she described their plans in detail. She didn't even notice I was there until I was right behind her. "Cancel the suite," I said to the receptionist, my voice low but firm. Emily froze mid-sentence, her body going stiff. Slowly, she turned to face me, her eyes wide with shock. "Nathan," she stammered, "what are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," I replied coldly, locking eyes with her. For a brief moment, I saw panic flash across her face, but she quickly masked it with a weak smile. "Sweetheart, I was just," she began, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Save it," I said, my voice steady despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "I've heard enough." I turned back to the receptionist. "Cancel all reservations under my account, except one for me," I said. The woman hesitated, glancing nervously between me and Emily, but a sharp nod from me got her moving. "Nathan, wait," Emily said, reaching out to grab my arm. "It's not what it looks like. We were just joking around. You know how Mom and Peter are." I shook off her hand, staring at her with a mixture of disbelief and disgust. "Joking? That's what you call mocking me and using my money behind my back? You and your family have no respect. Not for me, not for this marriage, and certainly not for yourselves." Emily's mother stepped forward, her face red with indignation. "Nathan, let's not overreact. We're family. We don't need to make this a big deal." I turned to her, my voice like ice. "Family doesn't treat each other like this. Family doesn't exploit, manipulate, and mock the people who support them. You're right about one thing. I've been clueless, but not anymore." Without waiting for a response, I walked away, leaving Emily and her family standing in stunned silence. I didn't care who was watching or what they thought. All I knew was that I was done being the fool in their twisted little game. As I stepped out of the hotel and into the cool evening air, a strange sense of calm washed over me. I was hurt, yes, and furious beyond words, but I was also free. For the first time, I saw Emily and her family for who they truly were. They hadn't just betrayed my trust. They'd betrayed the version of myself I thought I needed to be for them. No more. From this moment on, I was taking back control of my life, on my terms. I didn't know where I was going or what the next steps would look like, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let them drag me down any longer. With that thought in mind, I got into my car and drove into the night, leaving behind the betrayal and the people who had caused it. The luxury hotel lobby was buzzing with quiet elegance, soft instrumental music playing in the background, the faint clinking of glasses from the nearby bar, and the occasional laugh of a well-dressed guest. I had just stepped inside, thinking I was meeting Emily for a quick getaway she had excitedly planned for us. But as I walked toward the reception desk, a voice stopped me cold. It was Emily. Her laugh, light and carefree, reached me before her words did. "Honestly, he's so clueless," she said, her tone filled with mockery. "Nathan thinks he's this big-shot entrepreneur. Bless his heart, he really tries to fit in, but he just doesn't get it." The words hit like a punch to the gut, but it didn't stop there. "I mean, can you believe he actually thought he was part of this family?" Her mother, Margaret, chimed in, her voice dripping with disdain. "He's good for one thing, his wallet." "Oh, and it's a big wallet." Emily's brother-in-law, Peter, added, laughing loudly. "The best part is he has no idea we've been planning this trip for months. Using his money, of course." My legs felt rooted to the marble floor as their laughter echoed in my ears. Every word was like a dagger, twisting deeper with each cruel jab. I took a step closer, hiding behind a decorative pillar, not wanting to believe what I was hearing. "He even suggested I book coach," Emily said, feigning horror. "As if we'd lower ourselves to that. First class, obviously. And the suite? Oh, wait until you see it, Mom. He has no idea we upgraded." I clenched my fists, my breathing heavy. This was the woman I married? The family I had supported, sacrificed for, and welcomed into my life without hesitation. My mind raced, replaying every kind gesture, every moment I tried to prove myself worthy of their approval. And for what? To be laughed at? Used? Unable to take another word, I stepped out from behind the pillar and walked toward the reception desk. My footsteps were steady, but inside, a storm was brewing. Emily's back was to me, her voice still carrying as she described their plans in detail. She didn't even notice I was there until I was right behind her. "Cancel the suite," I said to the receptionist, my voice low but firm. Emily froze mid-sentence, her body going stiff. Slowly, she turned to face me, her eyes wide with shock. "Nathan," she stammered, "what are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," I replied coldly, locking eyes with her. For a brief moment, I saw panic flash across her face, but she quickly masked it with a weak smile. "Sweetheart, I was just," she began, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Save it," I said, my voice steady despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "I've heard enough." I turned back to the receptionist. "Cancel all reservations under my account, except one for me," I said. The woman hesitated, glancing nervously between me and Emily, but a sharp nod from me got her moving. "Nathan, wait," Emily said, reaching out to grab my arm. "It's not what it looks like. We were just joking around. You know how Mom and Peter are." I shook off her hand, staring at her with a mixture of disbelief and disgust. "Joking? That's what you call mocking me and using my money behind my back? You and your family have no respect. Not for me, not for this marriage, and certainly not for yourselves." Emily's mother stepped forward, her face red with indignation. "Nathan, let's not overreact. We're family. We don't need to make this a big deal." I turned to her, my voice like ice. Family doesn't treat each other like this. Family doesn't exploit, manipulate, and mock the people who support them. You're right about one thing. I've been clueless, but not anymore. Without waiting for a response, I walked away, leaving Emily and her family standing in stunned silence. I didn't care who was watching or what they thought. All I knew was that I was done being the fool in their twisted little game. As I stepped out of the hotel and into the cool evening air, a strange sense of calm washed over me. I was hurt, yes, and furious beyond words, but I was also free. For the first time, I saw Emily and her family for who they truly were. They hadn't just betrayed my trust. They'd betrayed the version of myself I thought I needed to be for them. No more. From this moment on, I was taking back control of my life, on my terms. I didn't know where I was going or what the next steps would look like, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let them drag me down any longer. With that thought in mind, I got into my car and drove into the night, leaving behind the betrayal and the people who had caused it. The next morning, I woke up with a singular focus, uncovering the full extent of what Emily and her family had done. Luke's advice rang in my ears. If they'd been abusing my trust financially, I needed to know how deep the damage ran. I wasn't just going to rely on assumptions or my anger. I wanted hard evidence. I started with my personal bank accounts. As I sat at my desk, surrounded by folders and my laptop humming with activity, a pit formed in my stomach. I hadn't realized just how much I had neglected to monitor the day-to-day spending in our marriage. I had always trusted Emily to handle the household expenses, never questioning the withdrawals or credit card charges. But now, every transaction was under the microscope. It didn't take long for the first red flag to appear. A $10,000 charge from 6 months ago at a high-end jewelry store, one I hadn't set foot in. Then another, $5,000 for a luxury spa retreat I didn't recall either of us attending. My heart sank as the list grew. Designer clothing, extravagant dinners, first-class flight upgrades. I opened the credit card statements, cross-referencing them with the bank records, and the pattern became painfully clear. These weren't occasional splurges or anniversary surprises. These were deliberate, ongoing indulgences, none of which had ever included me. But the real bombshell came when I turned my attention to my business accounts. As the owner of a successful tech startup, I prided myself on running a tight ship. But I also knew I'd let Emily access some of the accounts when she convinced me she could help with the admin work. Pulling up the account history, my jaw clenched as I scanned through the records. Personal expenses disguised as business costs. Payments to accounts I didn't recognize. And the kicker? A series of transfers totaling $50,000, all made out to Emily's brother-in-law, Peter. I froze, staring at the screen. Peter had pitched me a handful of investment opportunities over the years, half-baked schemes that I'd always turned down, but here it was in black and white. He hadn't needed my approval. Emily had given him the green light, funneling my company's money into his doomed ventures without a second thought. My blood boiled as I pieced it together. This wasn't just about Emily's reckless spending or her family's freeloading ways. This was outright betrayal, theft, and financial sabotage. I picked up the phone and called my accountant, Richard, someone I trusted implicitly. "Richard," I said, my voice tight with controlled anger, "I need you to go over every single transaction in the company accounts from the last 3 years. Look for anything unusual, large withdrawals, transfers, anything that doesn't add up." "You got it," he replied, no questions asked. Next, I called my lawyer, Mr. Cartwright, and laid out what I'd found so far. He was calm and methodical, walking me through the steps to document everything. "This is serious, Nathan," he said. "If Emily accessed those accounts without your consent, you have grounds for legal action, not just against her but anyone else involved. We'll need to move carefully, but you're in a strong position." By the end of the day, I had a growing file of evidence, screenshots, transaction logs, email exchanges, all pointing to a calculated effort by Emily and her family to bleed me dry. The realization hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just carelessness or entitlement. This was deliberate. I sat back in my chair, staring at the files on my desk. A mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief washed over me. How could the woman I loved and trusted have done this? How could she look me in the eye every day, knowing she was tearing me down from the inside? But as much as it hurt, there was a strange sense of clarity. For months, maybe years, I had been living in a fog, blindly trusting people who didn't deserve it. Now, the fog was gone. The truth was painful, but it was also liberating. That night, as I lay in bed, I made a promise to myself. I would take back control. Emily and her family had exploited me for the last time. They thought they could take everything and leave me broken, but they underestimated me. I wasn't just going to survive this. I was going to make sure they felt the full weight of their actions. And when it was over, I'd walk away stronger, wiser, and untouchable. The confrontation wasn't planned, but by the time it happened, I was ready. Every piece of evidence, every financial document, Every transaction I had uncovered was neatly compiled, labeled, and waiting to be used. The anger that had once consumed me had settled into something sharper, resolve. It happened on a crisp Saturday afternoon. I was at Luke's house, discussing the next steps with him and my lawyer, Mr. Cartwright. The doorbell rang, and Luke shot me a curious glance as he stood to answer it. Moments later, he returned, his face a mix of concern and irritation. "They're here," he said simply. I didn't need to ask who. Sure enough, as I walked to the door, there stood Emily, her mother Margaret, and her brother-in-law Peter. Their expressions ranged from feigned innocence to barely concealed fury. Emily had her arms crossed, her lips pressed into a thin line. Margaret was fidgeting, and Peter had the audacity to smirk. "Nathan," Emily began, her voice dripping with rehearsed concern, "we need to talk." I leaned against the doorframe, my arms crossed. Talk? Or justify? My tone was calm, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. Emily's eyes widened, but she quickly composed herself. "Look, we know you're upset about the vacation." "Upset?" I interrupted, my voice cutting through hers. "Emily, you and your family have been exploiting me for years. The vacation was just the tip of the iceberg." Margaret stepped forward, her tone laced with condescension. "Nathan dear, you're blowing this out of proportion. We're family. Families share responsibilities. Is that what you call it?" I said, my gaze locking onto hers. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like theft." Peter chuckled, but it was a nervous sound. "Come on, Nathan. Don't be dramatic. You're successful. A few bucks here and there isn't a big deal." I turned to him, my patience thinning. "A few bucks? Peter, do you want to explain the $50,000 Emily funneled to you from my business accounts? Or should I?" His smirk vanished, replaced by a look of shock. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I think you do," I replied, stepping back into the house and returning with the folder of evidence. I held it up, letting the weight of it sink in. Every transaction, every lie, every manipulation. It's all here. Emily's face paled. "Nathan, let's not do this here. We can fix this. As a family." "Family?" I said, my voice rising. "You think this is how family behaves? By mocking me, stealing from me, and treating me like a walking ATM? No, Emily, this isn't family. This is exploitation." Margaret, desperate to regain control, tried a different tactic. "Nathan, you're emotional right now. Let's sit down and talk this through. You don't want to do something you'll regret?" I stared at her, incredulous. "Regret? The only thing I regret is not seeing through this sooner. You've all taken advantage of my trust, and it ends today." Emily stepped closer, reaching for my arm. "Nathan, please. We can work this out. You don't have to cut us off." I pulled my arm away, my expression hard. "Emily, you made your choice when you decided to betray me. And now, I'm making mine. The accounts are frozen, the transfers are being reversed, and any access you or your family had to my finances is gone." Margaret's composure cracked. "You can't do this," she snapped. "We need that money." "No," I said firmly. "You wanted that money. You never needed it. You lied, cheated, and manipulated to get what you wanted, and now you're facing the consequences." Peter tried one last time to interject. "Nathan, let's be reasonable." I turned to him, my voice icy. "Reasonable? Peter, you've been gambling with money you had no right to. You should be grateful I haven't pressed charges." Yet, the weight of that word, yet, hung in the air, and I could see the fear flash in their eyes. They weren't used to this version of me, the one who wasn't willing to bend or appease. And it terrified them. "This isn't over," Margaret hissed as they turned to leave. "You're right," I said calmly. "It's not. But when it is, you'll wish it had been." As the door closed behind them, I let out a long breath. The confrontation had been intense, but I felt lighter, stronger. For the first time in years, I had stood up for myself without hesitation, without compromise. And I wasn't done yet. Luke clapped me on the shoulder, his grin wide. "That was a long time coming." "Yeah," I said, feeling a faint smile tug at my lips. And it's only the beginning. The last thing I expected was a knock on my door late one evening. The day had been draining enough. Reviewing more evidence with my lawyer, fielding updates from my accountant, and trying to shake off the lingering anger from the confrontation with Emily and her family. I was just about to settle down with a drink when the sound startled me. When I opened the door, I was surprised to find Ben, Emily's 8-year-old nephew, standing there with tear-streaked cheeks and clutching a worn-out teddy bear. His small frame seemed even smaller under the weight of whatever had brought him here. "Ben?" I asked, crouching to meet his eye level. "What are you doing here, buddy? Does your mom know you're here?" He shook his head, his bottom lip trembling. "I ran away," he mumbled. My stomach tightened. Ben had always been the one bright spot in my interactions with Emily's family. Innocent, sweet, and far too perceptive for his age, he had a way of seeing through the chaos and finding something pure. But seeing him like this set off alarm bells. "Come inside," I said gently, stepping aside. He hesitated, then shuffled in, his sneakers squeaking on the floor. I guided him to the couch, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge. "Tell me what's going on," I said, handing him the water. Ben took a sip, his hands shaking slightly. "They're fighting. Again," he said softly. "Grandma and Uncle Peter were yelling at Mom, and then Grandma said something about you." I frowned, leaning forward. "What did she say?" He hesitated, his eyes darting to the teddy bear in his lap. She said if you told the police, she'd tell everyone you were from foster care and ruin your business." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Margaret threatening to expose my background? I felt a surge of anger, but I forced myself to stay calm. None of this was Ben's fault. He was just a kid caught in the crossfire of adult selfishness. "Ben," I said carefully, "you know you can always tell me anything, right? No matter what." He nodded, his big eyes welling with tears again. "I don't want you to go away, Uncle Nathan. Grandma says mean things about you, but I think you're nice. You're the only one who listens." My heart ached at his words. "I'm not going anywhere, buddy," I said firmly. "And you don't need to worry about what Margaret says. She's just trying to scare people because she knows she's in trouble." "But what if she hurts you?" he whispered. I swallowed hard, unsure how to explain to an 8-year-old the depth of Margaret's toxicity. "Ben, there are some people in this world who say mean things to get what they want. But when you stand up to them, they lose their power. That's what I'm doing, standing up for myself." He sniffled, nodding slowly. "I wish I could stand up to them." "You will," I said with a small smile. "You're braver than you think. And no matter what happens, you've got me and Uncle Luke to look out for you. You're not alone." That seemed to comfort him, and he leaned into me, his small frame relaxing against my side. For a moment, the chaos of the past few weeks faded into the background. It wasn't about lawsuits or evidence or confrontations. It was about this kid, sitting here in my living room, trusting me to be his safe space. "Can I stay here tonight?" he asked after a while. "Of course," I said without hesitation. I grabbed some extra blankets and set up the guest room, tucking him in like he was my own child. As he drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the image of him standing at my door, scared and vulnerable. It hit me then. Ben was the reason I had to see this through. Not just for myself, but for him. He didn't deserve to grow up surrounded by the toxicity and manipulation of Margaret, Peter, and even Emily. He deserved better, a future free from their influence. As I closed the door to the guest room, I made a silent promise. I would fight for Ben, for his chance at a better life. And I would make sure that no matter what, he knew he could always count on me. The rest of the night passed in a blur of planning and reflection. Margaret's threat to expose my background didn't scare me. If anything, it solidified my resolve. My past in foster care wasn't something I was ashamed of. It was a testament to my resilience and determination. If Margaret wanted to weaponize it, she'd be sorely disappointed. By morning, Ben was up and laughing with Luke over pancakes. The sight warmed my heart, but it also steeled my focus. The battle wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting Ben from the dysfunction that had plagued his family for too long. When I dropped him off later that day, I looked him in the eye and said, "Remember, Ben, you're stronger than you know. And if you ever need me, I'm just a call away." He nodded, hugging me tightly before running inside. As I drove away, I knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But for the first time, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about reclaiming what was mine. It was about ensuring that someone like Ben had a chance to grow up with hope, not fear. The day started off deceptively peaceful. A crisp breeze filled the air as I stood on the sidelines of Ben's baseball game, watching him bat. His excitement was contagious, a rare moment of joy amidst the chaos of the past few weeks. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to simply exist in the present, cheering him on as he stepped up to the plate. The crack of the bat connecting with the ball pulled everyone's attention. Ben took off toward first base, his small legs pumping as fast as they could go. I found myself smiling, clapping as he rounded second and darted for third. But just as he slid safely onto the base, I caught sight of Emily and Peter walking toward me from across the field. My mood darkened instantly. They approached with an air of entitlement, as though they had every right to interrupt this moment. Peter's expression was smug, while Emily's was a mixture of desperation and anger. The stark contrast between them reminded me just how deep the dysfunction ran in that family. "Nathan," Emily started, her tone falsely conciliatory. "We need to talk." "Do we?" I replied without looking at her, keeping my eyes on Ben. "Because I'm here to watch my nephew, not entertain you." Peter let out a derisive laugh. "Come on, Nathan. Stop playing the victim and hear us out." I turned to face them, my patience already wearing thin. "I'm not playing anything, Peter. And if this is about money, the answer is no." Emily stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You're tearing this family apart, Nathan. Don't you see what you're doing? Margaret is a wreck, and Peter—" "Don't," I cut in sharply, my tone leaving no room for argument. "Don't you dare put this on me. Your family made their choices, and now they're dealing with the consequences. I didn't tear anything apart. You did that all on your own." Peter's smug demeanor faltered, replaced by frustration. "You're acting like we're the villains here. We're family, Nathan. Families stick together." "Family?" I repeated, narrowing my eyes. "You've got a twisted idea of what family means, Peter. Family doesn't manipulate, steal, or threaten each other. What you call sticking together is just an excuse to exploit me." Emily's face flushed, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But instead, she clenched her fists and said, "Fine. If that's how you feel, then I guess there's nothing left to say." "You're right," I replied coldly. "There isn't." She turned and stormed off, Peter trailing behind her. I watched them go, a mix of anger and sadness churning in my chest. I wanted to feel triumphant, but the sight of Ben, now running off the field toward me, reminded me that this wasn't just about winning. It was about doing what was right, for myself and for him. "Did you see me, Uncle Nathan?" Ben asked, his face beaming with pride. "I saw you, buddy," I said, ruffling his hair. "You were incredible out there." As he talked excitedly about the game, I found myself grounding in the moment, letting his happiness push aside the bitterness Emily and Peter had stirred up. For Ben's sake, I needed to stay focused. That evening, back at Luke's house, I filled him in on the confrontation. He listened intently, his brow furrowing as I recounted their attempts to guilt-trip me. "They don't know when to quit," Luke said, shaking his head. "But it's a good thing you stood your ground." "I'm not done yet," I said. "There's more to this." Luke leaned forward, intrigued. "What do you mean?" I pulled out my laptop and showed him the latest discovery from my accountant. Margaret had forged my signature on a second mortgage for their house. The documents had been carefully doctored, but the inconsistencies were glaring once you knew where to look. Luke let out a low whistle. "That's bold. And illegal." "Exactly," I said. "This isn't just about taking advantage of me anymore. It's fraud, plain and simple." "So what's the plan?" Luke asked. "I'm pressing charges," I said without hesitation. "Margaret, Peter, Emily, anyone involved. I'm done playing nice." Luke nodded, a flicker of pride in his eyes. "Good. It's about time they faced the music." That night, as I prepared the necessary documents with my lawyer, I felt a strange sense of calm. This wasn't just about getting justice, it was about reclaiming my power. For too long, I had allowed Emily and her family to dictate the terms of my life. Now, I was rewriting the rules. As I sat in my quiet living room, the weight of the day settled over me. The path ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would be more confrontations, more attempts to manipulate and undermine me. But I was ready. For Ben, for myself, and for the future I wanted to build. This wasn't the end. It was the turning point, and I was determined to see it through to the very last chapter. The Grand Hotel lobby was packed, its polished marble floors and crystal chandeliers glinting under the soft afternoon light. It was supposed to be just another day for the guests milling about, sipping their overpriced coffees or snapping photos of the ornate decor. But for me, this was the stage for what I knew would be an unforgettable confrontation. I hadn't planned to be there. I'd come to meet Richard, my accountant, to finalize documents for the fraud case against Margaret. We had agreed on a quiet corner of the hotel's cafe to discuss strategy. But as I stepped through the lobby doors, the unmistakable sound of Margaret's voice caught my attention. "Nathan needs to understand his responsibilities," she was saying loudly, gesturing animatedly to a small group of onlookers. Beside her stood Emily, her face a mixture of fake sorrow and barely concealed rage, and Peter, leaning against a column with his arms crossed, clearly enjoying the spectacle. I froze, my heart pounding as I took in the scene. They weren't just here to stir trouble. They were staging an ambush. Margaret's voice rose, drawing more attention. "After everything we've done for him, this is how he repays us. Abandoning his family? Destroying lives?" I clenched my jaw, fighting the instinct to charge in and shut it down immediately. Instead, I took a deep breath and stepped into the crowd, positioning myself just close enough to hear without being noticed. "We supported him when no one else would," Margaret continued, her voice quivering with false emotion. "And now he's cutting us off, freezing accounts, and leaving us with nothing. Is that what a real man does? Is that what family means to him?" Peter chimed in, his tone mocking. "And let's not forget, this guy isn't even who he pretends to be. Foster care, financial struggles. He's not the big-shot entrepreneur everyone thinks he is." That was the final straw. I stepped forward, my voice slicing through the murmurs of the growing crowd. "You want to talk about family, Margaret? Let's talk." Their heads snapped toward me, shock flashing across their faces before they quickly masked it with defiance. "Nathan," Margaret said, her tone dripping with condescension, "we were just lying." I cut in, my gaze sweeping over the three of them. "Manipulating? Trying to play the victims? Go ahead, Margaret. Keep talking. Let's see how well your story holds up when the truth comes out." The crowd shifted, sensing the tension. A few guests pulled out their phones, recording the confrontation. I didn't care. "Let them see." "What truth?" Emily said, stepping forward, her voice trembling with what I recognized as manufactured emotion. "You're the one who abandoned us. You're the one tearing this family apart." "Really?" I said, pulling a folder from my briefcase. "Let's start with the $50,000 Emily funneled from my business accounts to Peter's failed investments. Or the second mortgage Margaret forged my signature on. Or the hundreds of thousands of dollars you've collectively stolen under the guise of family expenses." The crowd murmured, their eyes darting between me and the trio. Margaret's face turned red, her composure cracking. "That's not true," she stammered. "You can't prove?" "I can," I said, holding up the folder. "Bank statements, transaction records, signed affidavits, it's all here. And this isn't just about money. It's about fraud, deceit, and manipulation. You've spent years exploiting me, and now you're finally going to face the consequences." Emily's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Nathan, please," she whispered. "We can fix this. We can make it right." I shook my head, my voice steady. "No, Emily. You had every chance to make it right, and you chose to betray me instead. This isn't about fixing anything. It's about accountability." Peter, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, his voice dripping with mock bravado. "You think you're so righteous, don't you? Letting everyone see what a hero you are? Well, newsflash, Nathan, you're not perfect either." I met his gaze, unflinching. "You're right, Peter. I'm not perfect. but I've never lied, stolen, or betrayed the people who trusted me. Can you say the same?" He faltered, his bravado crumbling under the weight of the truth. The crowd was silent now, their attention locked on us like an audience watching a courtroom drama. "This ends today," I said, my voice carrying through the room. "The free ride is over. The lies, the manipulation, the guilt trips, they stop now. You'll all face the consequences of your actions, and I'll make sure of it." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving them standing there in stunned silence. The murmurs of the crowd followed me as I exited the lobby, but I didn't look back. I had said what needed to be said. The reckoning was no longer mine to carry. It was theirs. As I stepped into the cool afternoon air, I felt a sense of closure. The public spectacle wasn't planned, but it had been necessary. For too long, I had let their lies fester in the shadows. Now, the truth was out in the open, where it belonged. This wasn't the end of the fight, but it was a turning point. And as I walked toward my car, I couldn't help but feel lighter, freer, and more determined than ever to reclaim my life on my own terms. The papers sat on the kitchen counter, the weight of them palpable despite their lightness. Signing the legal documents to press charges against Margaret felt like the final nail in the coffin of a chapter one never wanted to revisit. But there was no hesitation in my hand as I scribbled my signature on the dotted lines. This wasn't revenge, it was justice. Margaret's arrest came swiftly. The authorities were thorough, and the evidence I had compiled left little room for argument. Forging my signature on the second mortgage was her downfall, the act that turned her manipulative schemes into a full-blown criminal offense. When they took her into custody, I wasn't there to witness it, but Luke called me with the details. "They slapped the cuffs on her right in front of Peter," he said, his tone laced with grim satisfaction. "You should have seen his face. Looked like he was next." He wasn't wrong. Peter's involvement in funneling money from my business had placed him firmly in the crosshairs of the investigation. With Margaret gone, he was left scrambling to cover his tracks, but there was no escape. The legal process was in motion, and his reckoning was just a matter of time. Emily, on the other hand, tried to negotiate. She called me a week after Margaret's arrest, her voice shaking as she tried to sound conciliatory. "Nathan, can we talk?" she began. "What is there to talk about, Emily?" I replied, my tone devoid of emotion. "I know I messed up," she said quickly, "but I didn't know everything Margaret and Peter were doing. I was caught in the middle." I laughed bitterly. "Caught in the middle? You funneled money out of my business accounts. You mocked me, lied to me, and played an active role in their schemes. Don't act like you're an innocent bystander." She hesitated, her voice breaking. "I didn't want it to end like this." "Neither did I said. "But here we are." Her silence spoke volumes. For years, Emily had relied on manipulation and guilt to get her way. But now, those tactics held no power over me. "The only thing I care about now is Ben," I continued. "He's the one person in this entire mess who doesn't deserve any of this. So, here's how this is going to work. I'll support him and only him. If he needs anything, I'll be there. But as for you and your family, you're on your own." Her tears were audible through the phone, but I felt no sympathy. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. With that conversation behind me, I turned my focus to rebuilding. For years, my life had been shaped by the patterns of manipulation and guilt imposed by Emily and her family. Now, it was time to create new patterns, ones that prioritized my peace, my growth, and my future. I threw myself into my work, rediscovering the passion that had driven me to build my business in the first place. I expanded my mentorship programs, reaching out to young entrepreneurs who reminded me of myself when I was starting out. Their energy and determination were infectious, and being part of their journeys gave me a renewed sense of purpose. At the same time, I began to focus on my own well-being. Morning runs became a daily ritual, a way to clear my mind and ground myself before the day began. I started attending therapy, something I had resisted for years but now saw as essential. Talking through the betrayal and the emotional toll it had taken helped me unpack the weight I had been carrying for so long. But the most rewarding part of this new chapter was my relationship with Ben. I made it a point to spend time with him every week. Whether it was taking him to baseball practice, helping him with his homework, or just sitting on the couch watching cartoons. His laughter was a reminder of what truly mattered, a beacon of hope in the aftermath of the storm. One afternoon, as we sat in the park, Ben turned to me and said, "Uncle Nathan, are you happy now?" The question caught me off guard. "Why do you ask, buddy?" "Because you smile more now," he said simply. "You didn't smile a lot before." His words hit me harder than I expected. He was right. For years, I had been so consumed by trying to fit into Emily's world, so desperate for her family's approval, that I had forgotten what it meant to truly be happy. But now, sitting there with Ben, I realized that I was finally starting to find it again. "Yeah, Ben," I said, ruffling his hair. "I think I am." As the weeks turned into months, the shadows of Emily and her family began to fade. The legal battles continued, but they no longer consumed me. I had done everything I could to hold them accountable, and now I was focused on building a life they could no longer touch. The patterns of manipulation and betrayal were gone, replaced by patterns of growth, resilience, and genuine connection. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was truly in control of my own story. Forgiveness is a strange thing. It's not as simple as the movies make it seem. It's not about erasing the hurt or pretending the betrayal never happened. For me, forgiveness was about choosing to let go of the weight Emily and her family had placed on me. But it didn't mean forgetting, and it certainly didn't mean reopening the door they had so carelessly slammed shut. One evening, as I sifted through the last of the legal paperwork, a letter arrived in the mail. The handwriting was familiar, the careful loops and slanted lines unmistakably Ben's. I opened it slowly, unsure of what to expect. Inside was a heartfelt note that left me momentarily stunned. "Dear Uncle Nathan," it began. "Thank you for always being there for me. I know things are hard right now, and I miss when everyone got along. But you told me that being brave means standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. I hope someday everyone can be happy again. Love, Ben." I read the letter twice, my chest tightening with emotion. It was such a simple message, but it carried a weight that lingered. Ben, in his innocence, still believed in the possibility of reconciliation. And while I knew that rebuilding any kind of relationship with Emily and her family would require boundaries as firm as steel, his words planted a small seed of something I hadn't allowed myself to consider: grace. The next day, I visited Ben at his house. Emily answered the door, her surprise evident. "Nathan," she said cautiously, stepping aside to let me in. "I didn't expect to see you." "I'm here for Ben," I said simply, not offering anything more. She nodded, clearly unsure of how to navigate the interaction. Ben came running down the hall, his face lighting up when he saw me. "Uncle Nathan," he exclaimed, throwing his arms around me. "Hey, buddy," I said, kneeling to hug him back. "Got your letter. It meant a lot." He grinned. "Did it make you feel better?" "It did," I said honestly. "Thanks for writing it." Emily watched us from the doorway, a mix of guilt and longing in her expression. "Nathan," she began, her voice hesitant. "Can we talk?" I straightened, my tone firm but not unkind. "Only if it's about Ben." Her shoulders sagged slightly, but she nodded. "It is. I want him to have some stability. And I know you've been a big part of his life. I don't want him to lose that." "That's good to hear," I said, my eyes locking onto hers. "Because Ben's the only reason I'm here." Her face fell, but I held my ground. "Emily, I'm not here to rehash the past or pretend things can go back to the way they were. What happened can't be undone, and I won't put myself in a position to be hurt again. But Ben deserves better than the mess your family has created. So, I'm willing to stay involved for his sake, as long as we're clear on one thing." She nodded slowly. "What's that?" "I'm here for him," I said firmly. "Not for you. Not for Margaret. Not for Peter. My focus is making sure Ben has the support and stability he needs, nothing more." Tears welled in her eyes, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But instead, she simply said, "I understand." After spending some time with Ben, I left their house feeling lighter. It wasn't forgiveness in the traditional sense, but it was a step forward. I wasn't letting go of my boundaries, but I was willing to let go of the anger that had consumed me for so long. Not for Emily's sake, but for my own. In the weeks that followed, I channeled that clarity into new projects. One of them was a mentorship program at the local community center, aimed at helping kids from difficult backgrounds find their footing. It was something I'd wanted to do for years, inspired by my own experiences growing up in foster care. Ben was one of the first kids I invited to join. Watching him interact with the other kids, his confidence growing with each session, was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. He thrived in the program, and knowing I could offer him something positive amidst the chaos of his family life gave me a renewed sense of purpose. Emily, to her credit, seemed to be making an effort to change. She reached out a few times, always careful to keep the focus on Ben. I kept my responses brief, maintaining the boundaries I had set. While I could see hints of regret in her actions, I wasn't ready or willing to rebuild anything beyond what was necessary for Ben's well-being. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about opening old doors. It was about finding peace within myself and creating a future where their betrayal no longer held power over me. As I watched Ben laugh with his new friends one afternoon, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't thought possible. The past would always be a part of my story, but it didn't define me anymore. I had learned to set boundaries, to protect what mattered, and to let go of what didn't. And that, I realized, was its own kind of forgiveness. Standing on the balcony of my new office, I took a deep breath and let the crisp morning air fill my lungs. The view was stunning. Miles of cityscape stretching out beneath me, alive with movement and possibility. This space was more than just an office. It was a symbol of the new chapter one was writing for myself, one built on resilience and self-reliance. It had been months since Margaret's arrest, and the subsequent fallout with Emily and her family. The legal battles had ended, the accounts had been cleared, and I was finally free of their toxic influence. The Nathan who once bent over backward to please others, who sacrificed his own needs for approval, was gone. In his place was someone who understood the value of boundaries, integrity, and self-respect. The journey to get here hadn't been easy. I'd had to confront hard truths about myself, my relationships, and the patterns that had kept me stuck. But standing here now, looking out at the horizon, I knew it had been worth it. My first step toward rebuilding had been reclaiming my business. For years, I had allowed Emily and her family to meddle in areas they had no business being in, trusting their input when I should have trusted my instincts. Now, with their influence completely severed, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. My company wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. I'd expanded operations, hired new talent, and even launched a mentorship initiative for aspiring entrepreneurs. The mentorship program at the community center was another source of pride. Working with young people who reminded me of my own journey through foster care gave me a sense of fulfillment I hadn't found anywhere else. It wasn't just about guiding them through business strategies. It was about showing them that resilience and determination could lead to a better future. Ben had become a regular at the center, his confidence growing with every session. Watching him thrive was one of the most rewarding parts of this new chapter. He had started showing interest in technology, asking endless questions about how things worked and even building his first small project, a robot made from recycled materials. The pride on his face when it finally worked was something I'd never forget. "Uncle Nathan, do you think I could be an inventor someday?" he had asked, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Ben," I had said, ruffling his hair, "you can be anything you want to be. Just keep working hard, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Those words weren't just for him. They were a reminder to myself of how far I'd come. The Nathan who had once doubted his worth, who had allowed others to dictate his value, was gone. In his place was someone who had learned to embrace his strengths, his past, and his potential. Of course, the scars from the past hadn't vanished overnight. There were still moments when I caught myself replaying old conversations, wondering if there had been signs I'd missed or ways I could have prevented the betrayal. But those moments were fleeting, replaced by the understanding that I couldn't change the past. All I could do was learn from it and move forward. Emily had reached out a few more times, always under the guise of discussing Ben. While I had remained civil, I kept our interactions strictly limited to what was necessary. She had made her choices, and while I could see glimmers of regret in her actions, I wasn't interested in revisiting that chapter. Forgiveness didn't mean opening old wounds. It meant protecting my peace and ensuring I never repeated the mistakes that had led me here. One day, while organizing files in my office, I came across a photo from the early days of my marriage to Emily. It was a picture of us at a charity gala, smiling for the camera, looking every bit the happy couple. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness, not for the loss of her, but for the version of myself in that photo. He had been so eager to please, so desperate for validation, that he had ignored the warning signs. I placed the photo back in the drawer, closing it with finality. That man was a part of my past, but he wasn't coming back. The future belonged to the Nathan who had faced betrayal, weathered the storm, and come out stronger on the other side. As I stood on the balcony that morning, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from Luke. Big event at the community center next week. Need you to give a talk. Let me know. I smiled, already drafting my response. The community center had become a second home, a place where I could give back and connect with people who understood the value of resilience. The thought of standing in front of a room full of kids and young adults, sharing my story and encouraging them to chase their dreams, filled me with a sense of purpose. This wasn't just a fresh start. It was a transformation. The lessons I had learned, the strength I had gained, and the peace I had found weren't just mine to keep. They were tools to help others, to build something bigger than myself. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting its light over the city, I took one last deep breath and stepped back inside. The past had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. The future was mine to create, and for the first time in years, I was excited to see where it would take me.